All right, I think we're live. We are live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to your Wednesday. Welcome to Awesome Human Hour. If you are listening, welcome to the Awesome Human podcast. I can't believe now that we do these shows monthly, I can't believe it's been a month. Time is flying. So welcome, everyone. We have a really exciting episode today. I think I say this every time because it truly is. I wouldn't be coming to you if I didn't think it was exciting. But in a little bit, I'll be joined by Mark Goulston, who will talk about his story and what he does, but he is a conflict resolution expert. He used to train formerly he used to train FBI negotiators in how to negotiate. And he's also the author of the best-selling book called Just Listen. And the focus of our conversation today will be about how to listen better. And we'll get into conflict resolution too, I think. And if you're here with us live on Zoom, you'll be able to ask him questions. So Mark will be joining us in just a little bit. I'm just opening my chat if you're here live. Oh, awesome. I see so many awesome humans joining. Again, I always say this, you are never late to Awesome Human Hour. So, and if you're listening on a podcast and you'd like to be able to join live so you can ask questions, participate in chat, you can just go to nataliekogan.com/awesomehumanhour and sign up there. We get together about once a month or so. It's always on a Wednesday, but it's different Wednesday every month. And it's it's always great to be in person. So welcome, everyone. As you know, if you've been joining us for a little bit, and welcome if it's your first time, but we always begin, we have a little tradition. So we always begin, I ask you to do the following. Please complete this sentence. Today, I'm an awesome human because. Today, I'm an awesome human because. And as you you'll hear me say this every time. The reason that I ask you to do this is because our inner critic is really fantastic and very loud. And for most of us, we give our inner critic a lot of airtime. And we have to let our inner appreciator get some practice. And so one of the core principles of embracing your awesome human, of improving your emotional fitness, is learning how to quiet your inner critic and how to acknowledge the good in yourself. And so that's why we practice. So please complete the sentence. And I didn't even have to ask you. If you're here live, you're putting it in chat. I love when you put your responses in chat. If you're listening on a podcast, watching a recording, answer the question, complete the sentence for yourself. Today, I'm an awesome human because, and if you're on Facebook or watch this on YouTube, you can just put it in the comments. I love to see them too. I feel like reading some today. So when you see me, by the way, looking off to the side, it's because I have a separate display that shows me the comments in chat. I'm going to read some today. All right. I just picked these randomly, by the way. And I don't read your names, but if you put it in chat, you know that people can see your name. So let's see. I am an awesome human. Today I'm an awesome human because I decided to take care of myself and take yesterday off. Awesome. Today I'm an awesome human because I managed to get COVID and not infect my family. That's a big accomplishment. I'm an awesome human because I got up early to exercise and take care of me before I took my father to a doctor's appointment to take care of him. Yes, you can't give what you don't have. You hear me say this a lot. I love seeing this. Let's see. There's a lot of awesome humans are talking about that. What makes you an awesome human is making time to take care of yourself. I love that. I love seeing that. And I just want to remind you, when I ask this question of my audiences, when I speak, and often I hear people say, I don't know, I don't think I'm very awesome. And if that was your response, by the way, if that is the inner critic in your head said that, acknowledge that. And please remember that you recognize a lot of awesomeness in others. And most of us have very different standards for ourselves. And so one of the core ways to practice this kind of self-compassion towards yourself is to think about if you were your own friend, like if it was one of your friends or one of your family members who really cares about you, and you ask them what makes you an awesome human today, what would they say? We often ignore a lot of good things about ourselves because our standards for ourselves are somehow very, very different. So that's why we practice this every time. So again, welcome. We've just had so many more people join. I love to see so many of you here today. And I love to see some familiar and so many new names in chat. So again, if you're just joining us, you're never late. And of course, you'll get a recording if you registered on Zoom, so you can watch it again. And before we dive into our conversation with Mark today and talk about listening better, I want to share something. So yesterday was a really, really special day for me. It's also why I'm sounding a little coarse and I'm really tired. I went back to my alma mater, Wesleyan University, where I met my husband, Avi, many years ago, and where our daughter, Mia, is currently a freshman. But I went back to speak at my alma mater, and I actually spoke to the whole department, all the students and all the professors. I was in this major. It's called the College of Social Studies, kind of a separate college in the university. And it was a really, really full circle moment because I went to Wesleyan, let's see. So it was 1994. I was a freshman. I'd only been in the United States for a few years. I was still really, really lost. And going there and being part of that program really helped me kind of find me and learn how to speak and think. And so it was a full circle moment. It was kind of amazing to speak to all the students and all the professors. And I just want to share, I said something to them and it really, sometimes you say something and it sticks with you. So I just want to share that with you. Obviously they're all high achievers, wasn't super competitive. They're all like super achievers. And I was talking to them about my journey and how I spent so much of my life thinking that the way to live a meaningful life is to do really hard things, and that life is meant to be a struggle. And that's the only way you achieve anything meaningful. And I was asking them to reconsider this idea that life is a struggle and to recognize that it is really important for them to develop their inner awareness of their inner experience of life, and that challenge in life is absolutely constant, but struggle is optional because struggle is something we can reduce. For example, struggle comes from constant inner criticism. And when we practice self-compassion, when we practice what we just did, even in a small way, we reduce that struggle. So we were talking about that. And I said something that I'm not sure I've said on, in our community before. And it was that I realized that before I had burnt out, and for those of you who may not know my story, but after living a life of very high achievement and a lot of struggle, I did burn out several years ago, and it kind of changed a lot for me because I learned some painful lessons. And one of the lessons that I realized that I learned was that I didn't have an awareness of myself as just a human being. I had this perception of myself as someone who was to always be creating and doing. And I really thought that was my life purpose, to create and do and achieve. And I think it's really, really important. And I love being able to share this with our community. And if you've heard me speak, at your company or at a conference on stage, you've heard me say this, but it's really important to recognize that you're a being, not a doing. And this phrase, actually, the first person to ever say this to me was my teacher, Janet, who was helping me as I was going on my journey to heal and recover from burnout. And when she said it to me, one, I was like, what? I don't know. I don't even, I was so not even open to it. And second, when I thought about it, I hated it because, being, that means I do nothing. I have nothing to contribute. And I realized, this took me a while, that I put no value on my being before I burned out. The only way one of the reasons that I did so much nonstop and over efforted at everything is because I didn't think I had any value to anyone with just being. I had to over effort. I had to over try. I had to over deliver all the time. And that's what I was saying to these awesome college students yesterday. And I want to say this to you today, that your being has value. We forget this, right? But think about people you love. Do they have less value to you if they're not doing something, if they're not efforting in some way? No, you love them anyway. Like just their being in your life, their essence, their humanity, their energy, who they are has value to you, tremendous value. And we forget this in ourselves. And so that's something I just wanted to say this to everyone today. I wanted you to hear it because when I said it to the students, the room kind of went really quiet because I'm not sure any of them thought about it that way. And then my daughter was there, which was a huge gift. Mia was there, and I put her on the spot and said that I asked her a couple of years ago, of all the things that I have learned and that I've shared with her, what stands out? And she didn't miss a beat. She said, oh, when you tell me that I'm a being and not a doing, it's one of the most important reminders because I forget. I think if I don't get great grades, or if I don't get into the top college, or, if I don't always remember my friends' birthdays, et cetera, they won't like me, or I won't be valuable. And so I just wanted to, when I was talking about it last night, it had such an impact, and it just reminded me how important it is for us to recognize. So I wanted to mention that to all of you. And I want you to think about it. And for anyone who, when I said that, you're a being, not a doing, if your brain said what I said to my teacher when she said it to me, of like, what do you mean I'm a being? I'm a being, my value is that, I speak and I'm a great mom and I'm a great friend and I create these great things. Yes, what you do is valuable. I'm not saying it isn't valuable. What we do is valuable. But what I'm saying is it is not your only value, that you have value as a person, as a being, as someone who is part of a family or a community, or you team at work. There's so much value before you do a single thing. And, we live in a world, I'm not saying this actually with judgment, we live in a world that really values doing. It's, how much did you get done yesterday? Productivity hacks everywhere. We're all busy. We're all doing. I'm with you there. And I think it's really important. And I wanted to talk about this to begin Awesome Human Hour today. I think it's really important. And to pause, like right now, to pause and recognize that there's value to your being. You have value outside of all the actions that you take. And it's something that gets really lost. So I'm grateful that I got to say it to these kids yesterday. It was really funny, I have to say. I graduated in 1998, so it's almost 24 years. I think next year is my 25th reunion. And, they were college freshmen and sophomores and juniors there. And I said to them, I don't feel much older than all of you. Like, I know I probably sound ancient. And I realized this morning, you guys, that they weren't born when I went to college. And so they were looking at me, I'm kind of ancient. And I said to them, I don't feel that much older. So it was great to connect and great to share this with them. But anyway, I made a note in my mental note that I wanted to start Awesome Human Hour this way, that I wanted to remind you all that you are beings, not just doings. And I think it's really important in our world of busy and doing and accomplishment. And hi, I'm Nataly, and I'm a big accomplisher and big achiever, and I love to do things and I love hard work. Like, none of that is invalidated by the concept, by the essence that you are also a being, and your being has a lot of value to everyone that you impact in whatever way, personally or professionally. So with that, I see Mark has joined us. Mark, if you would put your camera on, I'm going to spotlight you for everyone, and then we can dive in. Welcome, Mark.
If you're too old, I'm half past dead.
Guys, I promise you this will be a lively chat, because last time I was on Mark's podcast, we had a really great time. And see, he jumps in with a joke. Welcome, Mark. Welcome to our Awesome Human Hour and Awesome Human podcast. We've got almost 200 people live today. A lot of people want to talk about becoming better listeners. And obviously we have lots of people who will be listening as a podcast and a recording. So I talked about your bio at the top of the hour, and we'll go through some things that you've done, but I actually want to jump in right with a question, if I may. I think I said this to you when I was on your podcast. Listening is something I'm working on. I'm not a natural listener. I talk for a living. I talk a lot. So can I begin with a question? How would you define being a good listener?
Well, I'm going to share with you something that will change your life and everybody's life. It's something that I've discovered only in the last 5 years. And by the way, I just heard that my book, Just Listen, became the top. It's number 4 in the 15 best communication books of all time.
Congratulations.
And it's $3.99 on Kindle for a few days. So that's in the chat
awesome.
here. So there you go.
Yes, there's a link in chat. And Mark, we always include the link in the show notes. So everybody's going to get a link in the follow-up email. But tell us what's going to change our lives. What
I realized is whenever you're with another person in a conversation, whether it's one-on-one like you and I, 1 on 200 like we are with the room, or 1 on 1,000 as I was in Russia, that underneath you listening to me, you're listening for something. And if I can let go of my agenda and only be focused and curious about what you might be listening for, and I'm going to give you, and I'm going to tell you what I believe you're listening for. And if it's accurate, let me know not only if it's accurate, but if something inside you changed. And what I'm hoping will change is the more transactional, accomplished human doing part of you. So as I put myself into your mind, I think what you're listening for is you've got a lot of people who have trust and confidence in you. And you want to honor their trust and confidence by not wasting their time. And what you want to do is give them something that will be immediately valuable to them, immediately, that they can use or do that will make their lives better, because you want to honor their trust and confidence because you don't take it lightly. Part of that also, and I think I'm going to dodge a bullet, I might not, but you're also listening for people who might be best-selling authors, but they're stiffs. I mean, they are awful. They pontificate, and you're thinking, I got to protect my audience from this person. Oh, I got to go back and say, we couldn't post it. We had technical difficulties or whatever. And so, because again, you want to honor the trust and confidence people have in you.
Bullseye, Mark. Mark has hit a bullseye. That is exactly what I feel and what I'm listening and what I want the audience to hear. Yes.
Yeah. And if you're listening into this, let me see if I can, see if I can push my luck here. This is the Awesome Human podcast. And if you're listening in, you want to find a way where you can feel more awesome because you're having some challenges. And even when you say to yourself, I'm awesome, it's, for many of you listening in, it's like trying to hold on to water and it just goes through your hands. I'll give you a tip that I use because I don't think I'm awesome. I don't. And I'm just sharing my own neurosis. I am envious and jealous of people who can make these statements about themselves and believe it. So I'm not able to do that. However, I have 8 dead mentors. The last one was Larry King. I had breakfast with him every day for a couple of years before the pandemic, and they're all gone. And I can't believe positive things about me, but when I'm having doubts or I'm feeling like an imposter, I'll wake up one of my dead mentors. So I think so far we're doing okay, but if we weren't, afterwards, I'd wake up Larry King and he'd say to me in his Brooklyn accent, Mark, I'm not even cold yet. Can you pick one of your older dead mentors? I mean, give me an effing break here. What's going on? Oh, I was on a podcast. I was so tangential. I started a story. I got lost. I said, here are the 5 things you need to remember. And I could only remember 3 of them. Mark, you woke me for this? Yeah. What do the hosts think? Oh, they want me back. Mark, put a sock in it already, will you? Let me rest in peace. I'm not even cold yet. But here's what, and so I reach out to what I call the Dead Mentor Society. And I was blessed to have them. And I can accept their believing in me more than I can accept me believing in me. And I'll tell you why it works, because I like to weave in a little neuroscience. When I imagine having that conversation with Larry and my other mentors, feeling that they believe in me when I don't, I get a surge of something called oxytocin.
Yes.
I feel this emotional connection. And something that many of your audience may not know is that when we're stressed, cortisol goes up. That's nothing new. But what many of your audience don't know is that high oxytocin counteracts high cortisol and stress. So look, if you can do yoga, mindfulness, God bless you. It's never worked for me because I need a hit of that oxytocin. And so when I think of Larry and I think of, some of the touching moments we had and being grateful to him and missing him, I get the surge of oxytocin. In fact, I'll share a story because people remember stories. Before he died, and at the beginning of the pandemic, he had many illnesses. I mean, it's amazing how many illnesses he had that didn't bring him down.
Yeah.
And I would occasionally go over to where he lived and hypnotize him so he would eat, because he just lost his appetite. And there was one moment when I went over there, and it was kind of the pandemic had started, and I kind of hypnotized him, and he's there in his suspenders, lying on top of his, his bed with his suspenders that he always wore. And then he wakes up, and I had this crazy feeling that it would be the last time that I ever saw him. I didn't know that. I mean, but I had this feeling. And he's waking up, and I said, Larry, one last thing. What? Larry, I love you. And he looked at me and he said, I love you, Dr. Morose. Because his nickname for me was Dr. Morose, because I'd go to these breakfast get-togethers with all these quirky people, and I would be listening intently, and they'd be talking about the Dodgers and politics. And every now and then he would look at me and he'd say, you're so morose, because I wouldn't talk. I'd just be listening intently. You're so serious. And I said, Larry, I don't want to bring people down. I don't have to come back. He said, no. We need morose, because we get ahead of ourselves. We get you a little bit hyper here. No, we need Dr. Morose. And so when he died, I put a tribute up on Instagram, and I was pretty emotional because I was recalling that how often do you get to have a conversation, in the last face-to-face conversation, you say to someone, I love you, Larry, and they say, with love, I love you, Dr. Morose.
That's really beautiful, Mark. That's really, really beautiful. I'll tell you something. Ever since I was little, it just made me think of this, of how we end conversations. So I was born, I don't think we talked about this on your podcast. I was born in Russia, as many people know, but I was born in the south of Russia, in Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan, which is now its own country. And I grew up in Leningrad, St. Petersburg. And so my grandparents, my mom's parents, still lived in Baku, and every summer I would go stay with them. And when the plane would land, and I'd run out, and my grandma and my grandpa, who I grew up with, my grandpa only died 2 years ago, so he was with us my whole adult life. I'd run out and they'd start feeding me fruit because there wasn't a lot of fruit or food in St. Petersburg. So they would just start, I was very skinny, they'd start feeding me. And my grandma would lean down and she was crying. She hadn't seen me all year and she'd kiss me and she'd say, oh, Natashenka. And so my Russian name is Natasha, as you might guess. I said, oh, Natashenka, I miss you so much. I just, and you're leaving so soon. It's only 4 months, but I know it's like almost you're leaving tomorrow. So I just want you to know I love you so much. And when you leave, I want you to know that. So, it's pretty comical story because my grandma would be talking about me leaving as soon as we met because, the time was so precious, but she would always say that, I love you in case like I somehow forget to tell you. That was the last thing she wanted me to hear every time I would leave her. And so your story about like that was the last thing, you and Larry saying that remind me to share that. I want to go back, Mark, because I love, one of the reasons when you and I had a conversation on your podcast, I think I said this to you, you said a lot of things that I kind of intuitively knew, but in a way that really opened up my mind, which is why I wanted you to introduce you to my community. So I love what you said about listening for something and thinking about what is that person listening for. I can pass up an opportunity to ask you about training FBI negotiators. Did I tell you on the podcast that it used to be my dream to be a spy? Well, it used to be my dream to be a spy ever since I was little. I know it's very cliche for a Russian immigrant. And actually in college, I called the CIA to try and schedule an interview. And they very kindly at the time laughed at me because I'd only been in the country for 5 years and I, didn't have the right, I wasn't even a citizen yet. So I want to ask you about that because I think the way you share and what you mentioned, it's already kind of enlightening. When we think of FBI negotiating, those are really like, in movies, most of us, that's where we've seen it. Intense situations in movies, there's a hostage, there's, lots of lights, lots of pressure, but we have conflicts like that all the time in our regular lives. It doesn't have to involve a hostage, right? There's a conflict in a family or at work. So I'd love for you to talk about, maybe share with us some of your insights or what you learned or what you shared with the FBI negotiators when we get into a tense conflict. Maybe it's a tense conversation with our boss. Maybe it's a conflict with a loved one. I'd love for you to share some insights just about what should we be listening for? What is the lens that is a helpful lens with which to approach a situation like that?
I'm glad you're bringing this up because one of the missions that I'm on, I'm a retired psychiatrist now, but one of my focuses was also suicide prevention. I was fortunate because in 30 years, none of my patients died by suicide. And I'll tell you something I'm excited about, and I'll send you something privately, but I can't share it. I can't share the video yet. Someone I've really become close friends to is a fellow named Jason Reed. He's a serial entrepreneur, a black belt, has had multiple businesses, has never been depressed. And his 14-year-old son died by suicide 4 years ago. And up until recently, he felt it was his fault. He's kind of worked through that. So he's not feeling super guilty, but he's still feeling that he missed a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something, I need a better adjective than excited because we're talking about suicide prevention here. But he's recently done a documentary called What I Wish My Parents Knew. And he interviewed 10 teenagers who are doing pretty well now about their lowest points. And it's a diverse group of teenagers. There's a gay African-American male, there's an African-American female athlete, there's a Latina, there's several white people, and they are mesmerizing. And it's only going to be shown in high school and junior high auditoriums for parents and teens, because if it goes up on Netflix or YouTube, the cyber bullies will just push these kids over the edge. They'll say, why didn't you kill yourself?
Yeah.
And the reason he's doing it is because even though he doesn't feel guilty anymore, it's about what he wished he'd known, but he was too late. And what all these teenagers talked about is how what they felt inside, they just couldn't tell anyone. They didn't want to burden their parents, or they may not have even have been money to go to a mental health resource. So I'm really excited because I think parents need to interact differently with their children. And we can't rely on mental health resources because there's too few of them. And if you don't have money, you can wait months to get an appointment. And what happened is by just having them open up more and more. So I know it's a tangent from FBI hostage negotiators.
No, you're talking about listening.
But
about getting to people to open up.
But here's something that I discovered, and I haven't written it up yet, but I probably will. When I finished training, I was very fortunate because a fellowship I was going to go into got canceled. And so I figured, well, I'll just go out there, and I have a mentor who's he was one of the top pioneers in suicide prevention. So, he'd probably send me a lot of people because a lot of people don't want to see people that are suicidal. And one of the things that I learned is that when I was with people who were very depressed or suicidal, and I looked into their eyes, they'd be screaming at me, not verbally, but their eyes would say, "You're checking boxes and I'm running out of time." And then I had one incident, which was one of the worst incidents, but worst incidents often teach us a lot. I was called to do a consultation on a patient on one of the medical units, and he had something that we didn't have a name for, because this was way back when. 3 years later, the name for what he had was AIDS. But we didn't know what it was back then.
Sure.
And so I was called up, and the doctor said, "We need you to okay an order for restraints," meaning tying his arms and legs down, because he's pulling his IVs out, he's kicking at the railings, he has a respirator down his throat, he's pulling at that. So can you go up and okay the order for that, and okay the order for the medicine, because he's psychotic. We'll call him Mr. Jones. And I go into the room, and his eyes are like saucers. And he's trying to communicate, but he can't because he has a tube down his throat. And he's going, I say, "What is it?" And he's screaming at me through his eyes. And I put a pencil in his hand, which was strapped down, and he just scribbled. And he was screaming at me through his eyes. And then I just thought, well, maybe they're right. Maybe he's psychotic. And I said, "We had to put your arms and legs down because you were pulling at the IVs and at the tube and kicking and everything. And I'll give you something to calm you down." So a day later, I get paged by one of the doctors, Mr. Jones, we'll call him that, is seated in his bed. He's off the respirator, he's off the restraints, and he told us to page you. So I go up into the room, I walk in the room, and his eyes aren't wide like this. His eyes are filled with rage. And he said, "Pull up a chair." And he sat me with his eyes, and he wouldn't let go of my eyes. And he said, "What I was trying to tell you is that a piece of that respirator tube had broken off and was stuck in my throat. And you do know that I will kill myself before I go through that again. Do you understand me?" And he wouldn't let go of my eyes until my eyes teared up with shame and compassion. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I understand you." And then he said, "Good." And so what I learned to do, and I think maybe this is why I was able to reach some people who are suicidal. And you might want to write this down, or if you're listening, write this down, because this is what you want to listen to when you're trying to reach someone. and the acronym is HFRFARD. H is hurt, and hurt is trauma, which you're probably there after the fact. So he was traumatized by breaking off in his throat. So the hurt had already happened. F is fear. The fear is I can't take this anymore. It's cutting off my throat. And because nobody is listening to you, the A is anger. And you're kicking because nobody is paying attention. The R is rage. And the D is I'm going to do something destructive. And that destruction can be either violence to the world or violence to yourself. There is some truth to something Freud said, that depression is anger turned inward. And so when you feel rage and you just can't take it anymore, and you can't be violent towards others, you're violent towards yourself. So what I learned to do, Nataly, is with my patients, I only listened for hurt, fear, anger, rage, and how much time before they were going to do something destructive. And I focused on that so completely, I sometimes didn't know what race or gender they were. I remember seeing someone who 6 months after being with him, he said, "Mark, I'm black." I didn't know he was black. What? Because do you follow what I'm saying? Is if you know that that's what they're broadcasting, something hurt me, and it could be a trauma from childhood, so that happened, but I'm afraid it's going to come back, and I won't be able to get through it again. I got raped in childhood. They're thinking I couldn't go through it again, and they're so fearful that they pull away, and then what happens is, when you're cornered and you're fearful, it turns into anger. When you're a wounded animal, you don't act afraid. If you're cornered, you get angry. And then if it looks like the next thing's going to just take you out, you get enraged. And when you get enraged, it's very volatile. You can stay with anger. I mean, there's a lot of people that can stay with anger a long time, but when it crosses over into rage, it's very difficult to stop that from taking action. So anyway, you've been listening, so I hope.
I want to ask you. You mentioned you started with a story of a parent who lost a child. I'm a parent, many parents here, and I want to ask you how would you apply this if you're, someone is in a difficult place, but they're not suicidal. Maybe it's a frustrated child, or it's a frustrated coworker. How do we take this into the more everyday tense situations where we do want to reach and connect and really hear that person?
So here are the tactics that when I do presentations to parents groups, along with Jason. It's what I call the 4 prompts. And here's the script, and I'm glad it's recorded. And there's videos of me saying it, so you could probably find it somewhere. I'll send you a link to it. But if you're a parent and you have a young child and you're worried about their mental health, and most parents are worried because of the lockdowns, school is closed, the masks, and we just read it's epidemic. Do this while you're doing an activity with one of your children. If they're teenagers, teens hate heart-to-heart conversations that they didn't initiate. I mean, it is nails on a chalkboard.
Yes.
Trust me.
I'm sorry, Mark, I'm interrupting, but I have an 18-year-old and we're very, very close, but maybe I couldn't articulate it in a sentence like you did, but somehow I figured this out early on that, if it was like, Mia, let's go out for ice cream and tell me about your day. Never.
Here's the script.
Okay. All right, let's do it.
And so while you're doing an activity, driving, or pick another time, you could say, a lot of us parents are just worried about our kids. we read something in the newspaper, we see something on the news, we wonder, could that be happening to our kids? Can I just run something by you because I'm kind of a nervous wreck? Okay, Ma, what is it? So here are the 4 prompts, and you work up to them gradually. At its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And they're going to say, what? Yeah, at its worst, at its most painful, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? Just tell me. And they might say, pretty awful. And I gave a name to my approach to suicide called surgical empathy. So if you look up surgical empathy, you'll find me, because I developed this. And so here's a little taste of it. When they say pretty awful, you say pretty awful or very awful? Okay, Ma, okay, very awful. So you're going in deeper, and you get them talking because you want them to get this out. Tell me about that. And then after they talk about that and they calm down a little bit with that question, you could say, second thing, when you have felt that, how alone do you feel? How alone do you feel with that? And then get them talking about that. And then the third prompt is, take me to the last time you felt that. What? Yeah, take me to the last time you felt that awful and alone with it. And something magical happens is when you can get them to describe something so clearly that you can see it with your eyes, they re-feel it. Was it at 2:30 in the morning? I heard you walking around in your bedroom and sounded like you couldn't get back to sleep. What was that about? Well, I couldn't get back to sleep. Well, what happened? Well, I got a big test or a big interview, and and I felt like hitting something. And wow, what'd you do next? So you get them to pull it out. I looked for some of your sleeping pills. I couldn't find them. Why don't you tell me where you hide them? And then what'd you do next? I just paced around, and then the sun rose. So you get them to tell you about the last time. And then if you're lucky, you will have earned the right to eye contact. And you say, honey, look at me. What? Look at me. I have a favor to ask you, and it's more than a favor. The next time you feel that, or you're even heading in that direction, I want you to do whatever it takes to get my undivided attention. Because my mind's on a million things. But there's nothing more important than my helping you feel less alone when you're feeling that awful. So you got that? And by the way, don't ever think that you're a burden to me. You can be a pain in the rear and you can be frustrating, but you're not a burden. And even if it looks like I'm frustrated, it's not a burden. And I'll tell you my proof of it. I'm going to do everything I can so that you're going to grow up and you're going to have a kid like you. And when they open up to you about anything, it's not going to burden you. So you got that? So those 4 prompts are, I think, pretty good.
They're very good. I actually jotted them down for myself, and I just posted them in chat since I wanted to keep this note for me, but I share. I think they're very good. And, I think it's just listening to you talk about them and just glancing at them now. What really stands out to me is actually the last thing you said, the last part of the last prompt is about the get my undivided attention, that you're not a burden. I think when I think about my relationship with my daughter or my relationship with my parents, this feeling that we don't want to burden someone with our troubles, even if they're willing to listen, even if they're saying, I want to be here for you, I want to listen, get my attention. We still have that. Many of us carry that. I think most. Well, I don't want to, my mom has a lot going on. My parents have a lot going on. I don't want to be a burden. What advice do you have for, maybe it's our ongoing interactions with our kids and others? How do we encourage people to recognize that we can handle their troubles? That's something I've said to my daughter. That's been my way to tell her. I said, Mia, I'm an adult. I can handle your troubles. I will not break if you tell me about something that's going on. I will be okay. And that's helped. So I'd love to hear any advice you have around that, because I know a lot of parents, and I hear this from a lot of Mia's kids, where they don't tell their parents things because they just don't want to be a burden. And actually, scratch the kids, a lot of adults that I work with, I talk about something, a practice for emotional openness, and people say, well, I don't want to burden people in my life with my stuff. So I'd love for you to offer any insights on how we can both ourselves not see it as a burden, but how could we convince people we care about that it's not a burden, that we can handle it?
Well, something you also want to realize is people are sometimes afraid that they're going to open up too much and scare you away.
Yes.
And it is pretty scary. I mean, I don't know how I did it, but with every suicidal patient, I just dove into the dark night of the soul and kept them company, because I knew that if I did that, they would start to cry with relief. So here's the key. If a lot of times, because we don't open up to our loved ones, if your child opens up or your loved one opens up and they start to cry, if you panic, oh my God, it'll be okay. Now there's some crying that's, frustrated crying or whatever. But if you can realize that that's the opening of the door and they're feeling relief. But when they start to cry, you freak out, they're going to say, why did you give me an offer to open up and now you can't handle it? And so in your mind, I'm asking you, if you're listening in or you're watching this, realize that when they can start to cry, it gives them relief. I'm going to share a story with you. Okay. And it kind of goes back to when I was being held hostage, but it's not what you think. My father had Alzheimer's disease, and he was driving my mother crazy, and they lived in Florida and I lived in California. And he was so driving my mother crazy because he used to have a photograph, and they both passed away many years ago, and I miss them. And my mother said, you got to come, you got to do something, because Dad is just trying to remember everything he forgot and he's losing the battle. And so, I get on a plane. It's a Mother of Mercy mission. My wife will tell you, tee that up to Mark. He's on the plane. So I go there, and they lived on some golf course community. And for 3 days, I tried to convince him. I tried to cajole him. I tried to kid him just to get him to take a walk.
Yeah.
And the night before I left, he looked at me and he looked at my mom, and he looked at me and he said, do me a favor. Don't visit again so soon. Just get off my back. Just get off my effing back. And so I thought, oh, the great psychiatrist comes to the rescue, and I didn't do anything. So I stayed up all night. I felt terrible. And this was in 1995. And the next morning, I'm looking at the galley copy of my first book called Get Out of Your Own Way, which also seems to have been an evergreen bestseller. Get Out of Your Own Way. You can find it, and seems to still be doing okay after 26 years. And I'm reading a chapter in the book called Trying to Change Other People. And it has 40 little chapters. And at the end of the chapter, there's something called a usable insight. So picture this. There's my dad. He's kind of staring out of the porch, and I'm on the porch. And I just feel like, mission failure. And I'm reading that chapter, which says trying to change other people. And the usable insight is something like, don't try to change other people, accept them as they are and hope they change, instead of not accepting them at all until they change. And I read that and I say, this book could sell. And then I put it down and I look at my dad and he's staring out. And I said, why don't you practice what you preach, Mark? And to understand what happened next, you need to know that a couple things. I'd never seen my dad cry. My dad was not particularly introspective. He was hardworking. And also, big medical illnesses are scary to him.
Yeah.
So some years before, he had colon cancer, and my mother said to my brothers and I, don't tell him he has the big C because he'll just obsess about it. So you get that mindset, you know?
Yes.
And again, I put the book down, and instead of trying to convince him of anything, my tone was inviting, and I said, hey, Dad, how you doing? And it was that tone. And he looked over at me, looked down, then he looked over at me, then he looked down, and then he looked at me and he said, I never thought it would turn out this way. And his eyes started to water up a little bit. And then he looked at me and he was concentrating with whatever concentration he had left. And remember, this is the guy who didn't want to know he had cancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, Mark, what is Alzheimer's disease? You're right. I went, And I told him, well, you can't remember stuff from 10 minutes ago, but you can remember things from 60 years ago. And then he just scrunched his face up like he's trying to concentrate. And he looked at me and he said, do I have it? And I said, I don't know. Used to have a photographic memory. I don't know. I mean, he could have been depressed. And, and then I went over and I kissed him on his head. And we went for a walk. But can you see the power of letting go of your agenda?
I literally just said the words in my head as you said them out loud. The letting go of your agenda. I think it's a really beautiful, I'm so grateful you shared that story, because I think that's the essence of being human, being a partner, giving love, listening. And it reminded me, I'm sure you've heard of it, but I want to share it. I wrote about this in my first book, that there's a community in Belgium. I forget the name of it. But there's a whole podcast episode about this. And the tradition in the community is that families take in some mental health people who have mental health issues, and they take them in for a year to live with them. And that's a tradition in this community, which I think is on its own really remarkable. And so the episode focused on this one family who took in this man, probably, I think he was in his 40s, who he was stable, but he had a lot of challenges, and how he flourished being in their home. And you listening to this podcast, and it's a very beautiful story, very elevating, until you find out that this family has their own son who has similar mental health issues, and he doesn't live with them. He went to live in a facility. And so they interview him, and they interview the parents, and the parents are heartbroken. They actually ask them, how come your son chose to not live with you when you're people who are taking care of another person similar age and he's really flourishing? And they're heartbroken. They're just saying, it was his choice. And then they interview the son. And he said, I love my parents, but I choose to live in this facility for people like me, because when I am with my parents, when I was living at home, I constantly felt that they wanted me to get better. I know it came from a place of love, but that's all I ever felt. Like whenever they asked me how I was, it was like, are you better than yesterday? Are we helping you enough? Is there anything we can do to help you get better? He said, and living here, it's just, I'm okay the way I am, and I'm actually doing better because no one is trying to get me to improve all the time.
Because what he was picking up was their anxiety, and the anxiety was driving them in their behavior to cause him to get better.
Yeah.
But one of the things I learned about suicidal patients is you have to go to where they're at, because when they're really locked inside, they can't go to you. And if you get frustrated and you say, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, how's that helping? Well, that's not going to help. And so what's happening is they're saying, look, I'm not trying to make you angry. And what surgical empathy is, and you can do a search on it because people find it an interesting term, because I spent so much time, and I'm retired, and I can't see people one-on-one. And so people saying you could reach I can't do it. I'm not licensed, I'm retired. But what surgical empathy is, if you can imagine that you're feeling really super depressed. I wrote an article saying that why people kill themselves, it's not depression. Got 400,000 views. You can still find it, I think, on Medium. And I said, a lot of people are depressed, they don't kill themselves. A lot of people lose a marriage, they don't kill themselves. Some people do. I said, but at the end, what they have is despair. And if you break the word despair into DESPAIR, it means unpaired, hopeless, unpaired with a future, helpless, powerless, worthless, useless, meaningless, purposeless. And when they all line up, pointless. And so they form a psychological adhesion to death to take the pain away. So it's not an attachment, it's an adhesion. It's like what happens after surgery. So when you have adhesions after surgery, sometimes you have to go in and surgically break them. And so surgical empathy is a process of going in and causing that person to feel felt by you before you throw solutions at them because you're anxious. And when they feel felt by you and you're not judging them, they may let go of death as the only way to relieve their pain and grab onto the empathy. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I just looked at the time. I can't believe we have to wrap up. Mark, I mean this. I don't say this to a lot of my guests. I could talk to you. We should do another episode because I'm learning so much, and I know the audience is too. But I actually want to, yes, there's a lot of excitement to do another episode. I love it. Mark is the wisdom and the depth and the warmth with which you share it, Mark, is really unique. So I'm grateful to you for that. But I want to say something in closing, and then what you said about, being felt by you before you give them a way out, I think is the true essence. And I think this is so true. And you'd probably agree, not just if someone is suicidal, but if someone is in any kind of difficult place. I was with my daughter yesterday because I spoke at my alma mater, and her roommate, a wonderful, bright young woman who's a first-generation college student, so a lot riding on it for her on full scholarship. She got a very, very not good grade on her first biology class quiz test. Now they're at Wesleyan University, my alma mater, very competitive school, very tough, right? And Mia was telling me that she just descended, in Mia's words, into just a cycle of despair. She said, Mama, I get upset about bad grades, but she was just, this is it. I can't be, college is showing me I can't be good at this. What's going to happen? I'm going to get kicked out. She just descended. And she said, I've never seen her in that despair. And I said, what did you do? She said, well, I just sat with her and just let her talk. And I just sat with her. And then we went to get snacks and I sat with her. And then I said, she said, I'd listen. And then I would say things like, it's one test, but she said, I first sat with her. And I think that's, in the simplest and most beautiful way, as you said, I think the biggest help we can give when someone's in any kind of despair over a test grade or something much more significant, lost marriage, or someone is in a really difficult place. And I say this from experience as someone who's been in those places where you don't see a way out. Actually, I want to end by go over a little bit because you shared something about your dad. I want to end by this, and I think you'll really appreciate it. I'm close with both of my parents. They're wonderful, but my mom gets to that anxious place. My mom can't really hear about my troubles. And I used to really get angry at her for that, but now I understand. She just can't handle my pain. So she wants it to go away. And there was one time this is after I had a child, but before I had my breakdown and really learn how to deal with my emotions, I would get to these places where it's like the end of the world and it would just explode out of me. And we were in New York City. And actually, I don't think I've ever shared this with anyone publicly, other than, my family. And I ran out of the apartment. My parents were over, they were watching me. I think my husband was out. And I left. I just couldn't deal with them because my mom starts to get to that tense place because she starts to get angry at me, which is not really anger. And I remember I ran to Central Park because we lived close by in New York City. And I sat on the ground, on the grass. It was cold. It was like November. It was not a sit on the grass kind of nice day. And 10 minutes later, my dad ran up, saw me, and he just came and he just sat next to me. That's it. He didn't say anything. He just sat next to me. And I'll never forget that. And that was a beautiful gift. He didn't say anything. He just sat next to me and we just sat there for a while. And I felt by him, to use your words. And I think that's listening. That's being human. So I'm really grateful, not just for everything you shared today. There's so much wisdom and learning, but I'm going to use this word, for the love that you share it with. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. We can't go a little bit over time because you just triggered a couple things.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do 5 minutes. Folks if you have to leave, you'll be getting a recording, and a lot of people have asked to do another episode. So yeah, tell me.
Couple things that you're reminding me of. I'm part of a couple documentaries, and one of them is on Amazon Prime. It's called Stay Alive, an intimate conversation about suicide prevention. And I interviewed Kevin Hines. He's the person who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. So he speaks all over the world. He's very well known. He helped them construct the nets that they're building underneath the Golden Gate Bridge because they have so many people who jump off that. And I was on his podcast and he was on mine. And he was talking about when he approached the rail to jump over it. And he just wanted someone to just see him and say, what's going on? And he said some person came over to him and he thought, oh, this person's going to save my life. And it was a tourist who said, can you take my picture? And so he realized, because it was also hearing voices, you got to kill yourself, you got to kill yourself. And then he jumped over the rail. And as soon as he left the rail, he realized this was the biggest mistake I've ever made. And so, you have a second and a half before you hit the water. And so he rolled into a ball and, he was able to survive. But in the podcast, just like you and I are relating, we did something. And I said, Kevin, I want to try something with you because you talk about that time. So you got past it, but you didn't get over it. And I want you to imagine that we're having a conversation and you're right there before you jump over the rail. And I look into your eyes and I see the hurt, anger, rage, got to do something. And I just hold onto your eyes and I say, let's sit down. And I want you to picture that we're there, instead of you jumping over the rail, we're just sitting down with our backs, to the rail, and you're talking to me like you're talking to me now. And you just keep talking. And there's a point in which you just collapse into my shoulder. And he is just sobbing. I'm sobbing now because that's all people need. But I want to end with one of maybe the best tactic I've learned for dealing with rejection, and maybe your daughter can share this with a friend. Sometimes when I give presentations, I'll ask people, and I'll ask you, how many breakthroughs have you had in life? And a lot of my audiences will say many, not just one, many. And then I'll say, raise your hand if the breakthrough was preceded by a breakdown that wasn't pleasant. Nearly everybody keeps their hands up. And I say, here's the deal. And I learned it when I was in training as a psychiatrist. When I would cover the emergency room, if it looked like someone was going to do something destructive, we could put them on a 72-hour hold. It's called a 5150, and you could put them someplace so they couldn't hurt themselves. So one of the best tips that I've learned, because I've had hundreds of breakthroughs and just as many breakdowns. And one of the problems is when we have breakdowns, often our coping mechanisms make it worse. You get drunk, you binge, and you feel so embarrassed and ashamed, you miss the breakthrough because you're too busy apologizing to people for how you acted up. So whenever something doesn't go my way, I put myself on a 72-hour hold, and I basically say to myself, don't do anything to make it worse. And just, do your usual habits. And I know it feels awful. And I know I feel like a fool and whatever. But I just say to myself, for 72 hours, don't do anything to make it worse. And I am telling you what happens is in almost all the cases, within 72 hours, some breakthrough happens. And sometimes it's not even related to what the breakdown was about. But the point is, I don't have to deal with apologizing to people for my getting drunk, and I don't have to deal with my own shame about something no one saw. But put yourself on a 72-hour hold and just say to yourself, don't do anything to make it worse. And the first 48 hours are the most difficult. But if you can make it 48 hours, I am telling you, breakthroughs start to happen.
Mark, that's beautiful. I'll end by Hetty just wrote, oh, that's the greatest advice I've ever got in a long time. So I think that is a beautiful place to end on. I am immensely grateful for you, not just, as I said, for your time and your wisdom, but for the warmth and the care with which you share it. I think that makes it so much more impactful. I took a bunch of notes. I shared as many as I could in chat. So we'll definitely have to continue the conversation. So thank you for making time for us. Thank you for lovingly sharing your wisdom. Thank you for being in the world. I feel very grateful that we got connected through your podcast. And I'd love to have another conversation. I'll reach out. And I think, as you can see in the comments, you gave us all a lot of gifts today.
Well, I'm dating myself here. None of your audience will remember this, but there was a movie called As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson and Helen.
That's a great movie.
And there's a famous line in there, and I'll do my Jack Nicholson thing. Nataly, you make me want to be a better man.
I love it. And Mark, that was a gift. My husband is a huge movie buff. We both love movies, but he's a buff. He has encyclopedic knowledge. He loves movies. He's going to be thrilled when I share a lot of what you shared, but also that. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone who is here live and who is listening and watching the recording. You are the reason I do this. You are the reason we have amazing humans like Mark join us with his wisdom. The next Awesome Human Hour will be in mid-November. Please make sure you are registered via Zoom. That way you get a heads up. And our next session, we're actually going to be talking about the power of connection and small acts of kindness. So we're continuing this theme. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Mark, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take really good care. I'll be in touch.
Me too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.